Hi, my name is Lindsay Abel, and I'm an academic specialist at my local community college where I currently serve low-income and first-generation college students. But I began my career for the first 5 years in the classroom as a high school Spanish teacher. And so both my showcase leadership and my research leadership project today, I'll be speaking from the point of view of when I was in the classroom. My first project I want to begin with is the showcase leadership. This was originally my management and motivation project from EDU 631, and I did this project over using workplace principles to serve as a form of classroom management. So there were a couple of factors that went into my interest in workplace principles and the skills that we use every day in our jobs and how students could use those in the classroom to better manage their behavior, but also to decrease apathy. At the time that I did this project, apathy was a big buzzword in my school because although we were identified as a school of distinction based on our accountability scores, which are largely determined by standardized testing, we also had a record number of zeros, students that were just not submitting work. And what that showed us and the administration in my conversations with them is that students very much could do the work and knew how to do the work, they just didn't want to do the work. Another issue that apathy showed itself in was the quality of employee that our local employers were getting when students graduated from high school. And I saw this firsthand through experiences of my mom, who owned a furniture store for 25 years, and my husband, who worked in one of the biggest employers in our community, which is the local hospital. Both of them would come home more often than not with very similar concerns about students who they would hire from the high school or right out of high school who just weren't meeting the expectations that employers realistically have. And so it was my hope that if I could better understand what employers wanted out of their employees, that I could do things in my classroom requiring students to utilize those same skills, but also through building relationships with students, get them to see the relevance of the skills that they need to complete assignments are the same skills that they can use later on down the road to be a better employee. So I started my research by looking at the U.S. Department of Labor as well as Forbes at what they want in employees. And pretty much across the board, everybody spoke about the same things. One of the key components to a good employee was someone who knows how to learn. They understand the process of trial and error, of failure, but then moving forward. And they understand when you don't know something, where to start the process of understanding that which you don't know. They also were really interested in people who could function as team players, specifically meaning people who could collaborate with one another, who could negotiate with each other, who worked well with diversity. They wanted employees that would be reliable, who could think creatively, problem solve, navigate making decisions. They also wanted young people who could self-manage, manage their time, manage their resources. And they were looking for people that would process information and then be able to produce something with the information that they were just given. So with this in mind, I also considered the work of William Glasser in reality theory, who really believe that young people need caring professionals who are willing to help them take responsibility for their behavior, but also create plans moving forward to alter unproductive behavior. So me moving forward, some of the things that I altered to help my young people manage their behavior in the classroom better and practice skills that would help them in their jobs down the road were I made changes. I made changes to parts of my curriculum, but I also made changes to just my daily protocols in the classroom. Some of my curriculum changes involved the types of projects that I had students complete. I started putting more of a real life focus on them, having them do things that require them to work together. A good example of this is when we do the unit on prepositional phrases, left, right, and front, behind. I created a project for them where they had to lead each other through an obstacle course using only those commands in Spanish, knowing that they would have to not only work together, but one of them would be blindfolded. So they were learning how to not just communicate, but if someone didn't understand them, change their way of communication so that that person could reach the finish line. I also changed some of my just protocols in the classroom, how students asked me for help. If they wanted tutoring or if they needed to talk about an assignment, I um, I created a system of making an appointment with me the same way that a student would make an appointment with a doctor or a dentist. And so I had a calendar that they had to sign up for time slots before or after school to meet with me. One of the most effective things that I implemented that really portrayed what it's like to work with people, your coworkers in real life, was something called a base group. And the way that I used base groups was as a form of accountability, but also as a way for students to learn from each other and gain insight into how other students were navigating Spanish class, so that hopefully if they were doing something right, then the student could hear from their experience and then take that and apply it to their own experience to perform better in the classroom. And then from the relationship standpoint, I really changed the way that I spoke to my students. Very often, I began referring to parts of those workplace principles like persistence and self-management, and reliability. And sometimes I would use things in class, even if it wasn't Spanish related, like the Gatorade commercial where it shows the hard work chant from the U.S. Army, just as a way of motivating them, of keeping them focused, of giving them encouragement. And what I ultimately saw was that there was a decrease in the number of students that I had failing at the end of the trimester. And there was an increase in tutoring requests. That appointment system proved to be very effective, and the base group system of students reflecting on their exams and things as a group and not just getting a test and looking at it and throwing it away, they were really able to start better understanding what is it that I don't understand that the person in my base group does. And so they would make tutoring requests knowing what they needed help on. Something really interesting that also happened, sort of coincidentally, but I like to think it was a product of my conversations with administration as I was executing this project, was that they provided resources to all of our advisories for something called Skills to Pay the Bills. And so it wasn't required, but it did become something that each Wednesday when we had class advisory, teachers could choose to implement during that advisory time. The Skills to Pay the Bills were very focused on those workplace principles. And so overall, I found this to be a really effective project, and what I learned about what employers were looking for continued to mold how I approached my classroom management for the next 3 years that I was at this school. So next is my research-based leadership project, and I sort of took what I had began with the workplace principles and using that as classroom management and ran with it and dug in deeper. And where I came out on the other side was with the art of creating a student-led learning environment. What I discovered was that student-led learning environments incorporated a lot of the things that the workplace principles focused on. It decreased apathy. It increased intrinsic motivation, which was a huge part of my student-led learning environment research project. And so to give you just some things to have in your head as I dive into this, when you think student-led, some of the words that come to mind that sort of help paint a picture of what a student-led learning environment is are things like student engagement, active learning, learning process. A teacher-led learning environment is what we think of as more traditional, where there's a lecture and then students take a test. Student-led involves a lot more discussion. They're doing activities, and the focus is on the growth of the student. So some of the red flags that are what showed up to me that wanted me to dive into student-led learning environments were, again, local employers who weren't happy with the employees that they were getting out of high school, the all-time high for our student apathy in our school, and this really curious disconnect between how high our students scored on standardized tests and the acknowledgments that our school was receiving as a school of distinction, but the number of zeros that our school continued to have from the whole of the student body. So it caused me to wonder what is going on in our classrooms. My plan was to observe classes, survey students, identify qualities of a student-led learning environment, and then look at which classes possess these qualities, and then report on this and hopefully be able to come up with ways that across the board teachers could improve their classes by creating more of a student-led environment. So part of a student-led environment is that students take on an active role. They are doing things and thinking about the things that they are doing. And when you look at a student-led environment, it probably should not look the same as a traditional classroom. What we see in a teacher-led environment are single desks, all pointing the same direction, which is towards the teacher, because the teacher sort of serves the role of the holder of all knowledge. But in a student-led learning environment, the teacher takes on the role of a facilitator, and so the room is going to be set up so that it's more conducive to students being able to work and interact better together. Intrinsic motivation is one of the main benefits of student-led learning environments, but for that to happen, students need a couple of things. They need to feel that they are contributing to their learning process, and this is more than just student choice, where you give them options on how they want to complete a particular assignment. This is real student involvement in the direction that their learning is going to go in. Students also need to feel confident that they have the skills to be able to tackle what's in front of them. Teachers can help facilitate this by appropriate scaffolding. And students also want to feel that they're collaborating not just with their peers, but also with their teachers, and increases the feeling of connectedness as a whole, which aids in their intrinsic motivation. Charlotte Danielson provided a framework that my school at the time used, and to my knowledge is very popular among schools in the United States. But what's interesting is the Charlotte Danielson framework, that is a scoring tool for administration to use on their teachers, actually incorporates a lot of the things that a student-led learning environment should have. So if a teacher is doing the things that Charlotte Danielson framework says they should be doing, they're probably already incorporating a lot of the student-led learning environment qualities into their classrooms. It was John Dewey who said that life in the classroom should mirror the process students will face in society. And so I set about to look at what are we doing in our classrooms to create these student-led environments that will mirror what a workplace will look like for them in the future. And I did this through a cross-sectional survey of my school in Western Kentucky that is a total of 1,038 high school students. Now, my cross-sectional survey was of 50 students, and they are 50 students whom I had direct access to, and all had each of the core content classes. What I found was that more students feel that in math, they never communicate with each other. Students felt that when they do get to work together in English, math, and history, it's less than 15 minutes. And pretty much most students in every class reported traditional layouts where they would ask a teacher if they needed help, and they did not make choices about their assignments. Those students were only somewhat motivated. So what we know is that increasing these workplace skills, increasing the qualities of a student-led learning environment could lead to more relevant student experience in the classroom.